Meccano part number 52 in a mesmerising 1930s blue and gold pattern. Just a bit played with. Hi and welcome back. This week's build is the fourth from the aeroplane constructor set, and it's the day bomber. These kits are huge. The size of them is just not done true justice on camera. And at nearly 100 years old, they're showing their age, with the years of damage caused by play. And that's the thing to remember about these sets. They were toys to be played with. And I wonder how many had moments of free flight as the string holding them up to the ceiling snapped under their weight. The metal they were made of is a thinner, more lightweight metal than is normally used by Meccano, and as such it deforms with such ease. That said, the model is still, to me, a moment of joy when finished. I am so tempted to just build all of them in one mass orgy of Meccano building, but I think I'll probably sicken myself all too quickly. I picked up a couple of clockwork motors recently, and in that learning curve of life, realised that complete on eBay might not mean complete. Both motors are missing their control rods, so while this one was fitted with a motor, it does not operate. The drive shaft that you see later popping out of the bottom of the machine was designed to power the wheels and to allow the model to taxi along the floor. I need to look into getting one of the smaller electric motors that should fit the body, and for the time being power the model by that. I haven't hung one from the ceiling. As tempting as that might be, knowing my luck, it would drop on my head. And I must apologise as some of the footage disappears off camera. I've changed camera to a DSLR, and footage is a lot better than the GoPros I used in the beginning, but I also need to look at getting a different lens. The joys of learning new skills and not yet having all the toys to play with. But what is a day bomber, and why were they all the rage for about 30 years? The manual reads for this build: day bombers may easily be distinguished from night bombers by their much smaller size and by the fact that they usually carry only a pilot and one gunner, whereas the crew of a night bomber may consist of 4 or 5 men. The night bomber relies upon remaining unseen by reason of its dark colour and the height at which it flies, and if discovered, it trusts to its comparatively large number of machine gunners to beat off attackers. The day bomber, on the other hand, obviously cannot be hidden and depends principally upon its speed, which is often as great as that of a single-seater fighters that will endeavour to stop it. For example, the maximum speed of the Hawker Hart, the machine illustrated, is 184 miles per hour, which is approached only by the very modern fighters. The Hawker Hart was a light bomber in service with the RAF in the 1930s, up until around 1943, when it was retired, having been completely outclassed by more modern designs. The Hart had several variants, and was operated by a number of different air forces around the world. The Hart is an end of an era. Even at this point in the early 1930s, designers like Nikolai Polikarpov were working on the groundbreaking I-16 with a top speed of over 300 miles an hour. A year later, Flight Lieutenant George Stainforth would break the flight speed record in the Supermarine S-6B at over 400 miles per hour. Both these aircraft were monoplanes, and the world of the biplane must have seemed somewhat humdrum in comparison. The theory of the day bomber predates the First World War, and its role carried on until around 1950, by which time the role of the strike aircraft had become vogue. The first day bombers were designed and built by both the Italians, Russians and the British, with the Caproni CA-30 and the Bristol TB-8 for the fledgling RFC, or Royal Flying Corps, and was the first bomber to make a sortie in the First World War, attacking a German gun battery on the 25th of November 1914 at Middelburg in Belgium. It was the only sortie to be flown by the TB-8, as it was considered too slow for frontline service, with its top speed of only 70 miles per hour. The First World War saw a theory of one aircraft for each role, instead of today's practice of, where possible, aircraft being able to carry out multiple roles. The downside to the First and Second World War idea of one aircraft, one role was firstly the increase in the supply chain, and secondly, all too often, aircraft unsuited to the role they were still expected to carry out the sortie, as they were the only aircraft available to do so at the time. Post-World War II saw the introduction of the attack aircraft, and as light bombers go, the A-10 Thunderbolt fulfills the role perfectly. Okay, the A-10 might not be a light bomber, maybe the finger of God when it comes to that role might be a better explanation. The intention of the light bomber was to deliver munitions accurately, and in the German pre-World War II theory, that was a Schnell bomber or fast bomber, relying on speed only to get it into and out of harm's way as quickly as possible, with little to defend itself, and made as light as possible to gain the maximum benefits from its engines. While the theory was great, the practice was not so great. The technology that allowed the aircraft to fly fast was soon added to state-of-the-art interceptors, and the weakly defended bombers were shot down. All too often, in the fluid and dramatic arms race of an active war, designs would come and go quickly. Aircraft that seemed sound before the war were quickly outclassed as the conflict opened. The Fairey Battle is a perfect example. Entering service in 1937, just 2 years prior to the Second World War, with a maximum speed of 257 miles per hour, it seemed perfectly at home in the role of the fast bomber. Scoring the first kill of the war, and already by this point it had had its glory days. By May of 1940, the battles were recording nearly 50% losses in engagements against the enemy, and by the end of 1940 it had been removed from frontline service and was relegated to overseas training units only. Throughout the development of this channel, I've tried to search for the names of the people that invented the prototype, the ones that solved the problems and gave us what we have today. And in my research for this episode, I came across a name. This person is not an engineer, but they broke records and changed the way that society operates today. They didn't design anything, but they redesigned what we see as normal now. Without them, maybe the rules that exist on what we can and cannot do would be different. Sabiha Gökçen was the first female combat pilot in the world. She flew as a pilot in the Turkish Air Force in the 1930s, through till she retired in the 1950s. Some things seem so simple now, but this was the mid-1930s, and while Turkey was undergoing a period of modernisation, Sabiha's achievements are amazing. Born in 1913 in the city of Bursa, when she was 12 years old and an orphan, she told Mustafa Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey, of her wish to study at a boarding school. After finding out about her appalling living conditions, he adopted her. In December of 1934, the Turkish government passed the surname law, and Ataturk gave her the surname of Gökçen, meaning belonging to the sky. At an air show in 1935, Sabiha was first introduced to gliders and parachutes. and from there her father encouraged her to pursue her newfound fascination for aviation. She received her flight patent, the Turkey's equivalent of a pilot license, in 1936. By the time of her retirement in 1954, she had clocked around 8,000 hours and was an instructor who had inspired other Turkish females to become combat pilots, and was awarded the FAI Gold Medal for her contributions towards aviation in 1990. She passed away in 2001 from heart failure, aged 88. History is one of my great passions. The little bits of information that singly seem trivially unimportant, but yet helps us understand our world so much better. For instance, the conflict that Sabiha Gökçen was involved in was the 1937 to 38 Dersim rebellion, the history of which is as fascinating as it is morally wrong, and in fact, if it were to happen today, would see the world rise up in outrage at the war crimes that were committed. I knew nothing of it. If anybody had asked me before I started researching and planning this script, I would have laid the distinction of first female combat pilot at the doors of Russia, something after 1941, not 6 years earlier in Turkey. And this is the beauty of learning for the sake of learning. I gain nothing from this knowledge in the way of reward, apart from the reward of knowing something new. And that's the thing. Learning and reflection on what you have learned makes us better people. Just the thought of the obstacles that Sabiha must have faced and overcome to get to where she did. This is a quality of women that we should be holding up as a society goal of what to achieve. Those people that push to be the best and challenge what is expected of normal. Of the 1935 surname law in Turkey that forced you to take a surname for the first time in history, and the effects of what that must have had on everyday people. And then there was this build. This build is so of its time, and I love the aeroplane constructor models. Next week's build is the Dornier Do X, made in standard Meccano, and it's okay, sort of. It sort of catches the look of the aircraft, just. But then standard Meccano is so much more versatile than this set. After all, you're limited by only what you can think of with standard Meccano, while this set builds around 50 or so models, and that's it.